Hey, this is Jason Kleberg from the Force 5 podcast, a show that forces a guest to come up with a movie-themed top 5 list topic, and then we reveal our picks on air. Top 5 heist films, top 5 tearjerkers, top 5 movie dogs. Every show you'll be asking yourself, what would be on my list? Guests include directors, screenwriters, actors, podcasters, musicians, authors, and even a professional wrestler. Subscribe to the Force 5 podcast, and you won't just be a listener, you'll be a list nerd. The Force 5 podcast, available wherever you're listening now.
Do you love movies? So do I. What's up, y'all? It's KB, and I love movies, inviting you to listen to The Conversation, a film podcast where passion meets perspective and opinion. From the old school to the new, I invite a guest on to discuss the movies that thrill us, challenge us, break our hearts, or even blow our minds. There's always new episodes dropping wherever you get your podcasts. So join the conversation. We don't just watch movies. We love talking about them too. The Conversation with KB Loves Movies, a part of Someone's Favorite Productions podcast network.
A joke on the children.
Welcome to Wake Up Heavy, my weird dad's weird podcast about weird movies. In this episode, my weird dad will be talking about
Halloween 3, Season of the Witch, the night no one comes home.
Thank you, Cleo, as usual, for the introduction. Kind of sounds like you might be coming down with something, though. Mom or I might need to get you some medicine. Hello, and welcome to Season 1, Episode 3 of Wake Up Heavy. This is Mark, your horror host. And this month, we've got something different. Well, maybe not different for October, but different for the show. I left it up to the audience as to which movie I would be discussing. And it was between Dead and Buried from 1981, directed by Gary Sherman, or Halloween 3, Season of the Witch from 1982, directed by Tommy Lee Wallace. And the hands-down winner was Halloween 3 by all of, I think, 6-2 votes. So thank you to those 8 people who voted. I appreciate it. It's actually about the number that I expected, to be honest with you. And yes, it's October, and this is the month where normal people decide to watch some horror movies, and where horror people, of which I include myself, just kind of maybe ramp it up a little bit. The weather is starting to cool off here, which means one thing for me at least, not so much background noise, and I don't know if that'll be apparent or not, but if you do notice that things sound a little better, that is probably the main reason. And with the fall comes rain and fog and colder days, which do elicit a horror movie response from me. And I think back in about 2013, I really dug into October and decided in November, why stop here? And I had a long break from being kind of a horror fanatic. And I thought, well, you know what? We've got all these streaming services. There's all these movies from the past that I never rented or saw. And it just kind of took off from there. So I think it was around 2013 or so. The ultimate result was this show. And the point of the show is to kind of look back And once I catch up to like 2013, which, by all accounts would be in 30 years. So hold on, people. This is going to be going on for 30 years. Well, maybe not 30 years. I have given myself a 5-year goal, though, to kind of get double the audience and maybe get out there beyond Fresno and my family. So we'll see what happens. I don't intend on quitting anytime soon. I'm having fun doing this. I do have a guest lined up for hopefully November. We're still trying to decide what movie to do. And once we do that, then I'm going to have to figure out the technical part of recording both of our tracks and getting that all together. So if not November, I have movies already lined up for the next couple of months, but there are guests coming. So Halloween 3.
You don't really know much about Halloween. The barriers will be down between the real and the unreal. And the dead might be looking in. The last great one took place 3,000 years ago when the hills ran red.
Halloween, the show. You happen to know anything about this Cochran?
All I can tell you, mister, watch out. He's watching you, friend, I guarantee you that.
Trick or treat.
Hey, Mr. Cochran, just what is the final process?
Fellas, I was just kidding.
Witchcraft. To us, it was a way of controlling our environment.
Hey!
Where are they taking her?
They're taking her to the factory.
I want a mask. Can I have a mask?
Just what I had in mind for you, little buddy. Why, Congress? Why? Do I need a reason?
I've got nothing here to indicate there was ever a body at all.
Operator, this is an emergency.
I do love a good joke, and this is the best ever. The joke of the children. I'm glad you'll be able to watch it.
You've got to believe me.
They're going to kill us. All of us.
Stop it!
The world's going to change tonight, Doctor. Happy Halloween.
Stop it!
Halloween 3, Season of the Witch, the night no one comes home.
You know what? I hadn't even seen all of the 8 movies in the Halloween franchise up until a few weeks ago, and I decided I really needed to rectify that before I could discuss Halloween 3 and its place in the franchise, or my place for it in the franchise, as far as what I consider my favorites. Halloween is a much beloved franchise by a lot of horror fans. It's not one of my favorite franchises. To be perfectly honest, I don't know if I have a favorite franchise. Most of the horror franchises are so hit and miss. It's hard to totally embrace all of the movies in any one, like Friday the 13th, very hit and miss. Nightmare on Elm Street, again, really hit and miss. And stuff like Scream and things like that, again, I don't think I've even seen all of them. I did decide to watch all of the original franchise Halloween movies, not the Rob Zombie movies, which I have seen, which I may discuss at the very end when I kind of rate the movies. I don't know if there's much point in doing that with those. And unfortunately, the series wasn't available completely through streaming services. I kind of had to search out a couple different venues and platforms, and a couple of them I watched TV edits of, and I don't know, other than some cussing, I don't know that too much was cut out. The gore seemed pretty intact. So anyway, but of the movies that I had seen up until 2 weeks ago, Halloween 3 is, for me, tied with the original film for first place. I've probably watched each about the same amount of times. I know that when I was young, Halloween 3 was actually rented more often than Halloween 1 or 2. And that was because it had that kind of weird vibe. And if you've been listening to the show at all, it's become very apparent that I like weird movies. Let me backtrack a little bit and give my one-sentence synopsis of Halloween 3. And again, if you've been listening to the show at all, you know that I struggle with these. However, this is kind of easy to do because the main plot of the story is very simple. There's just a lot of side action going on in different scenes that don't necessarily have to do with the main plot, and we'll get into a little bit of that later. But for the purposes of the podcast, here is my synopsis for Halloween 3, Season of the Witch. Dr. Dan Chalice and Ellie Grimbridge search for the connection between her father's death and the Silver Shamrock novelty and mask-making factory. Done and done. At one point, when I started thinking about doing this episode, I had gotten it into my head that I might play the Silver Shamrock jingle the same amount of times that it appears in the movie. And I think it's kind of a funny idea, but I have a feeling that people would be turning this off much quicker than they would normally have done. So I'm not going to do that, but I did have to mull this one over. I started recording last week and really realized that I was being too cynical and too critical of the movie. A movie that I admittedly really, really like. And I think it was kind of a hipster type thing, like, oh, I can't be too positive about it, because it's kind of dumb and it's not really all that well made. And when I finally actually watched it for my notes and my research and to find those things that I never noticed about the movie, I thought, boy, I'm glad I stopped with that recording because it's actually a really fun movie. It isn't poorly made. It's just kind of maybe a little bit sloppy. This is a movie that, along with the other movies that I've discussed and the upcoming movies that I'll discuss, was a regular rental. And John Carpenter actually occupied a number of those spaces in the early to mid 80s for me of movies that got rented constantly. The Thing, Escape from New York, Halloween 3, and the other two Halloween movies were constantly rented and watched. Not until Christine came out that I actually got to see one of his films in the theater. And that became a regular rental as well when it came out on video. But Halloween 3 came out in October of 1982. I wouldn't have been able to rent it for about a year. This is back in the early days of VHS. For those that aren't old enough to know this, generally it was a year or possibly longer before a movie made it to video. It could be a couple years. Sometimes rights issues came up with movies and they wouldn't come out for a long time. I remember really waiting a long time for Pink Floyd's The Wall to come out, and there were issues with the music rights and getting that all cleared up. I think it was like 5 years or something before it came out, and of course I was really, really disappointed when I finally saw it. But anyway, that's a whole other story. The point being, in this case at least, I had heard all of the hubbub about Halloween 3 before I ever saw it. When it came out, it tanked at the box office. It got destroyed by critics. Fans absolutely loathed it. So I had heard all those rumblings and mumblings when it came out, and then, in the ensuing year. And it didn't really matter to me. I had probably only seen the first two films a handful of times, maybe not even a handful of times prior to that. I think Halloween didn't show on TV until Halloween 2 was coming out in the theater. That was when John Carpenter, now he didn't direct 2 or 3. He and Deborah Hill were still producing the movies at this point. So when Halloween 2 came out, Halloween 1 was showing on TV for the first time. I may not be 100% right on the facts of that. The reason I say that is because when it played on TV, Carpenter had been doing the reshoots for Halloween 2. And this is kind of a weird story because Halloween 1 is known for not having a lot of gore. There's very little blood in the movie. That wasn't the point of the movie. It was more about just kind of that dread and fear that the shape created. For Halloween 2, which he didn't direct, he did do the reshoots that kind of amped up the violence and the gore. Along with that came all the stuff about Michael Myers and Laurie Strode being brother and sister.
That doesn't sound right.
And so there were some extra scenes shot for Halloween 1 for the TV version to kind of pad out the running time because of the stuff that they did have to cut, or also maybe just to fill in the 2 hours. I'm not 100% sure about the particulars of that either. I saw it first on TV, and I think it scared the crap out of me, to be honest with you, and it is still a very effective movie. Kind of succeeds where 4 and on fail, and particularly with the character of Michael Myers. So in my roundabout way, I guess I probably would have seen 1 and 2 prior to 3, but I'm not 100% sure about that. I just knew that Michael Myers wasn't in 3. I had heard all that, and it didn't matter to me. A lot of people kind of look back and say, oh, if they had just released it with the subtitle only, Season of the Witch, maybe it would have succeeded without that expectation that people had. And who knows if that would have been the case or not. It didn't do well, but I'm sure there were people like me who saw it who didn't have that connection, that real strong connection to the first 2 yet, and enjoyed it for what it was. And I think the idea behind it was really brilliant, and I really wish it had worked out. The genesis of Halloween 3 was basically that Carpenter and Hill wanted to move away from Michael Myers. They had essentially killed him off in 2. He is supposed to be dead. Loomis is supposed to be dead. Part 3 was supposed to create an anthology series of films that would come out yearly or every couple of years. That was a whole different story, and the only connection was that it happens on or around Halloween. I think, personally, that's a great idea, and we have that kind of stuff now. Maybe not so much with movies, but with TV shows, we do. And there were anthology series before this, such as The Twilight Zone, Outer Limits, and all that stuff, but they weren't, that was a different story, cast, crew, or not crew, but writer, all that stuff. Every episode was something different. There was no connection really other than it was all the same show. This would have been more akin to something like American Horror Story or Channel Zero, where every season you have some of the same casts, obviously the same writers and things like that, but a whole new story every season. And so this is, I don't know if this had been done before with a movie franchise. Sorry for the blank space, but I'm trying to think of something, and I'm sure there are maybe some out there. And if you know of something, please comment on one of the platforms here, SoundCloud or iTunes or the blog. But yeah, I think it would have been a great idea. It could have been a jumping board for a lot of cool movies, a lot of new stories that could have branched off and become their own franchise. Who knows what could have happened, but it failed so miserably that I think 6 years later, they brought Michael Myers back with Halloween 4, and this idea never went anywhere. And this is where kind of my cynicism crept in when I was starting the recording of this originally, in that it might have done well if the movie had been better. And I don't know that that's even fair to say after having watched it again for the episode. I just think it had the cards stacked against it the whole time. And part of that cynicism was I started thinking about Tommy Lee Wallace and his contributions to horror movies. And he's been connected to some real duds. I thought, well, what's the common denominator here? It's him. So maybe he just wasn't the guy to take the helm of this first attempt. He's one of those guys that sort of gets tossed sequels. He wrote the script for Fright Night Part 2, which is kind of a mess. He wrote the screenplay for Amityville Part 2, which is also kind of a mess, but I remember watching that one and being I actually liked it, but it has some strange stuff in it. There's hints of incest and all this other weird business, but I remember enjoying that movie when I first watched it.
That doesn't sound right.
And then the other real thing that I kind of grabbed onto was the fact that he wrote the screenplay and directed the TV version, the miniseries of It. And I am not a fan of that miniseries at all, and I know that it has become much beloved, especially with the release of the new movie. Everybody looks back on it kind of with rose-colored glasses, and I think that's mainly due to Tim Curry's portrayal of Pennywise, which I am not that fond of. Most people have pretty fond memories of the first half of the show, and the second half just absolutely crapped out. And I remember watching it when it came out, because I had read the book and been kind of too young to read the book. All of the backstory and all that really kind of bored me, and I didn't understand a lot of what was going on, and it's pretty weird. But the kid stuff, of course, is what everybody really enjoys about that. And so the first half was pretty fun, and I don't even think back then I finished the second half. And a lot of that was because the writing was so atrocious, and the acting from the adult leads is really ham-fisted. And so I had it in my head that this was, this is all Tommy Lee Wallace. He wrote it, he directed it. But apparently, on a lot of this stuff, it was kind of not the script doctor, but he would often come in when a screenplay had already been completed and did work on it. And I recently watched an interview with him. I don't know how true this is. This is from his mouth, but with It, he didn't really have any part of the second part of the miniseries. That was another writer, Lawrence Cohen, not Larry Cohen, but so maybe the deficiencies of these movies and miniseries didn't rest solely on his shoulders, as I was kind of leaning towards. But Wallace was a part of John Carpenter's inner circle. He had worked on a number of his earlier films in different capacities and had been offered the opportunity to direct Halloween 2 and didn't take it. I think he did work in another capacity on that. The original script for Halloween 3 was written by Nigel Neal, who had done a lot of Hammer and other British films in the 60s, and I think he was an older gentleman at this time, and he was given plot ideas from Deborah Hill, and she wanted there to be a combination of modern technology and ancient religion. So that was kind of the jumping off point. In the same interview that I mentioned earlier, Wallace said that about 60% of the original script survived. And of course, much like with Halloween 2, there were some reshoots and some additions that amped up the gore and the violence, and Nigel Neal said, take my name off of this. And so that's why we have the screenplay by Tommy Lee Wallace. And I just want to take a second here and talk about Deborah Hill real briefly. She kind of gets cut out of the picture on a lot of this. She and Carpenter were partners for a number of years, and she helped craft a lot of his work. You know, we mention Carpenter as horror fans very often, and we don't mention Deborah Hill often enough. She was responsible for a lot of what went into Halloween 1, 2, and 3. She was responsible for a lot of what went into Escape from New York. So let's not gloss over her contribution to the franchise and a lot of the other work that Carpenter is known for. Plus, she was the double for little Michael Myers' 6-year-old Hans in the first movie when he is stabbing his sister. So if Halloween 3 isn't about Michael Myers, what in the world is it about? Well, it starts on October 23rd, and we have a man running down the street being chased by a car filled with businessmen. He eludes them a couple of times and ends up at a gas station where he collapses. He's clutching a pumpkin mask, and the man at the gas station calls the ambulance for him, and he ends up at the hospital where Dr. Dan Chalice works. The only thing he says is, they're going to kill us all.
They're going to kill us. All of us.
One of the businessmen shows up at the hospital and kills Mr. Grimbridge. Now, the interesting thing about this, one of the things I noticed on this rewatch was that it starts out 8 days before Halloween. And so we kind of have a leisurely pace here. And I don't want to compare this too much to the first two movies since it is a totally different story. But in Halloween 1 and 2, we have a total time of about one full day. Halloween starts out early morning or late night, maybe the day before Halloween, and then it proceeds into Halloween night, and Halloween 2 picks up immediately after, and I think only kind of really goes on for a few hours, really. And so this one, we've got 8 days to kind of figure out why this man was killed. So there'll be a title card for the passage of time, and you're going, man, there's still like a week left, or 5 days, or whatever. So eventually, Grimbridge's daughter, Ellie, shows up at the hospital, and of course, she's distraught, and Dr. Chalice is concerned. He is an alcoholic philanderer, basically, is what we get through the movie with him. He's constantly drinking. He has an ex-wife who is played by Nancy Loomis, who was in Halloween 1 and briefly in Halloween 2 as one of Laurie Strode's friends. And she and Tommy Lee Wallace were actually married for a while. And in this movie, she's Dr. Chalice's ex-wife. They have 2 kids. Chalice is constantly flirting with every female member of his staff. He's smacking butts and making double entendres and all this stuff. And Tom Atkins' wife plays Marge Gutman in this movie, and I think there was one other spouse connection, which I can't quite remember at the moment. But there's a great scene when he goes home to give his kids some Halloween masks, and they're, like the old vacuum form Ben Cooper or Collegeville style masks, and they're not that thrilled. And Mom has bought them masks already, and of course, they are 2 of these silver shamrock masks. One of them is wearing the witch head, and the other one has the skull I think we have the first instance of the theme at this point. Not the theme, I'm sorry. The Silver Shamrock jingle.
Happy, happy Halloween, 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 happy, happy Halloween, Silver Shamrock.
And the little boy is played by the same actor that was in Near Dark and River's Edge, and I will have to contact the research department to get his name and insert it here. So that young man's name is Joshua John Miller, and I'm kind of glad I looked him up because he has some interesting connections to other actors in the movie and other actors in real life. He is the son of Jason Miller, and he is the half-brother of Jason Patric. Now, Joshua John Miller was in Near Dark, as I mentioned, the same year that Jason Patric was in The Lost Boys. And then Tom Atkins, who plays his dad in Halloween 3, worked with Jason Miller in The Ninth Configuration. So after that, Ellie finds Chalice at his favorite bar a couple days later. This is after the funeral. Chalice has gone. This is one of the things I noticed for the first time this last viewing. He went to the funeral. She thanks him for that, and they start discussing what happened to her dad. And she has kind of narrowed it down to the last place that he was seen was at the Silver Shamrock factory. And after that, he missed some appointments. So they go to his store. He was selling these Silver Shamrock masks and apparently went to the factory to pick up an order. Now, this is one of those kind of odd plot devices that can throw people off, and it throws me off. Who goes to the factory to pick up their orders? This is apparently a company that deals nationwide, as we will see later on in the movie, who is running commercials nationwide, which we will see later on in the movie. Generally, people don't pick up orders at the factory. That is a whole separate department. So, we're using movie logic here, and you suspend your disbelief. And then the other thing that always kind of threw me off was, what was the relation in distance or area between these places? The factory is in a fictional town called Santa Mira, which had appeared about 25, 30 years earlier in Invasion of the Body Snatchers. So they used the name of that town for their fictional Northern California town here. And Ellie points out that it's nearby.
Little place, not too far away.
When I start thinking about the logic of the movie and the opening with Grimbridge running to the gas station, I have to start wondering, okay, well, if this is close to the factory, then it's also close to the hospital, unless it was so remote that the closest hospital was where Dr. Chalice worked and it was just a long ambulance ride. I don't know. I don't know the particulars. All I know is that later on, when Ellie and Dr. Chalice are going to Santa Mira, it takes them a while. We've got a lot of slow dissolves. They talk about distance, taking Highway 33 for this many miles, etc., etc. So that's one thing that I think maybe is a little bit of a logistics goof there. By the time they do get to the factory, though, they're still days out from Halloween, and at this point, they're not privy to what's going on, and neither are we as an audience. It's sort of hard to separate that from the knowledge of the movie as a whole when you've seen it numerous times, but they haven't figured out what's going on yet. But when they do get into town, they do notice that they're being watched. And I think Chalice has a line here about, factory town. So they're outsiders. And there are TV cameras everywhere.
I feel like a goldfish.
Company town.
So they pose as a couple who are there to pick up an order from the factory. And apparently a bunch of other people, well, at least 2 other people are there to pick up orders. And now I kind of like how they rationalize this in the script. One of the customers, Marge Gutman, says that she can't stand dealing with the company on the phone anymore. Not that she likes coming to this town, but it's better than that. So we kind of have a little plot device here that adds more characters, which I think was probably a part of the script that was added later for more kills. So Marge Gutman gets taken out by one of the, she calls it a trademark. It's the Silver Shamrock logo, and these are all put on the masks. They're big, clunky metal things, and one of them falls off, and she discovers that it has a computer chip on the back of it. So in her room that night, as she fiddles with it, it goes off. It misfires, as we later learn.
What happened? Misfire.
And it blasts a laser into her face. And so we have kind of our first gore scene here. And it's kind of gruesome and gross, and a potato bug crawls out of her mouth, which is, for me, the worst part of it, because I don't know why, but those things creep me out. And actually, I'm factually wrong on that. It wasn't the first gore scene. Chalice kind of takes a walk around town and runs into a bum who bums a drink off of him and kind of bad mouths the town and the head of the factory, Colonel Cochran. Now I have to stop for a second.
It's time for another tangent.
This is one of the things that as a child, or not a child, but as a young teenager, I never understood, because I thought his name, or I thought they were calling him Colonel Cochran, kind of like Colonel Sanders. So I think I just had it in my head, you know, if you're some old white dude and you run a company, you can just kind of take the title of Colonel. But it's not Colonel Cochran, it's Conal Cochran, Conal. He is Irish, as is most of the town. The original idea was to have the cronies or the minions, the guys in business suits that pop up all over the place. The idea was to have them all be redheads to kind of hammer that Irish aspect of the story home. They didn't. There's only a couple of them that are actual redheads. I guess they just couldn't find that many redheaded extras. And notably, one of the main assassin or main businessman, as I like to call them, is Dick Warlock, who played the Shape in Halloween 2. And he gets offed a number of times in the movie and keeps coming back. So you're kind of going, what's going on before you really realize what's happening. So after Chalice leaves the bum, two of these dudes show up and rip his head off. And it's particularly squirty. So that's really the first gore scene in the movie. The scene with Grimbridge at the beginning is kind of brutal. The business dude sticks his fingers in his eyeballs and pulls the bridge of his nose out, and I guess this goes into his brain or something. But it's not bloody, it's just a little bit cringy. And then that guy goes off and self-immolates in his car for some reason.
I think it's time for a break.
So when Chalice gets back to the motel room, we have a really awkward sex scene between he and Ellie. And I really only bring that up because previously when they get their room, he delivers one of my most favorite lines from the movie.
Where do you want to sleep, Dr. Chalice?
That's a dumb question, Miss Grimbridge.
And of course, their whole relationship to me, I think even back then when I watched it, just seemed kind of weird. Tom Atkins as a leading man, as a Lothario, it just kind of never really worked for me. And he's been around for ages, and he had worked with Carpenter before. He was in Escape from New York. He had a major role in a movie that's popular with a lot of horror fans, but I don't care for, Night of the Creeps. And he was in the remake of My Bloody Valentine, which I actually kind of enjoy. But in between their first and second session of lovemaking, excuse me, I always kind of choke up on that term, they hear what's going on in Marge Gutman's room, and then we have another great line from Chalice here.
What's that?
Who cares?
And then we get a shot of Tom Atkins' naked butt.
That doesn't sound right.
They're still kind of low-key about everything. Don't seem to be in any rush. Of course, they don't have a real indication yet of what is going on. I think Chalice starts to get uneasy when Cochran shows up and they take Gutman back to the factory where she's going to receive the best care possible. And of course, he's a doctor, so he tries to intervene and they kind of push him off. So the next day, he and Ellie go to the factory, and one of the other customers, the Kupfers, who we were introduced to the day before, are there because Buddy Kupfer is one of the top sellers in the nation. And he is there for a special tour, and Dan, Chalice, and Ellie Grimbridge get to go along with it, and they kind of learn a little bit more about Conal Cochran. Kupfer says that he is the king of the practical joke.
Conal Cochran, the all-time genius of the practical joke. He invented sticky toilet paper. Oh, you must know. The dead dwarf gag, the soft chainsaw, all his.
And so after the tour, Ellie sees her dad's car in a building off the side of the factory, and she kind of gives herself away here and says, "That's Papa's car."
That's Papa's car!
Which, again, here is another plot device. Why would the car be exposed that way? The businessmen are standing all around, and I think they finally get the idea that something fishy is going on here. During this time and previously, Chalice keeps calling back to Teddy, the coroner. This is one of his past conquests. And apparently, which I finally discovered when I was watching the Tommy Lee Wallace interview, this was one of those script additions. This was a reshoot to introduce the person that Chalice kept calling. Apparently that part was in the script. He kept calling the coroner to get reports on, and again, I don't know why you would be doing this, to get reports on the businessman who killed Grimbridge and then immolated himself. Why he would be curious about the findings of the autopsy report on him, I don't understand. But there's 2 or 3 calls back to Teddy about what she's found, and she keeps implying that there are really no human remains. All they find are car parts. And so this addition to the script meant that they had to also include her in an earlier scene. So they do all this, they set up this character, it kind of goes in line with his philandering. It really has no payoff because although she does get killed by one of the suits, it's not in a very spectacular way. And I kind of feel like they blew it on this one. If you're going to add that and up the body count or whatever, make it a special effects scene at least. But we don't even see what happens. We know what happens. She gets drilled in the head, but it's not shown. And to me, that seems kind of pointless. So this is when things kind of ramp up. It still goes at a leisurely pace, but we've discovered that something's awry. Chalice is trying to call out again, and he can't get through to anyone. I'm sure this is not anything new to people familiar with the movie or with the franchise, but the phone operator or the voice is Jamie Lee Curtis. So she makes a little cameo in the movie.
Yes, information.
I'm sorry, we cannot complete your call as dialed. Please hang up and check the number and dial again.
That kind of brings up the universe that this exists in, because earlier when Ellie and Chalice meet at the bar, the TV is on and there is a commercial playing for Halloween, the original film. So in this universe, Halloween exists as a fictional piece of work. And the other point that brings up is when we learn about the big giveaway for the Silver Shamrock Company. And that is why all the kids across the country need to be at home at 9 o'clock after the movie plays to see the commercial for the big drawing. And of course, so all the commercials that have played previously are just commercials for the commercial that will be playing after Halloween shows.
It's almost time, kids. The clock is ticking.
While Chalice is making his phone call, or trying to make his phone call, Ellie is kidnapped. He discovers this when he returns to the motel and then escapes from the businessmen and ends up in the factory. He finds an old lady knitting and thinks that she can help, but it ends up being a clockwork figure. Then he has a run-in with one of the businessmen, and this is Dick Warlock as the main assassin, and they fight, and Chalice punches him in the stomach a number of times, and apparently these robots, which all the businessmen are filled with wires and orange concentrate.
These are our workers. They make the juice. We make sure it's never frozen, flavored, or concentrated. Simply orange. Honestly simple.
So once Cochran captures him, we get kind of a James Bond scenario here with an over-explanation of the villain's master plan. The Kupfers have been invited back to view the commercial and offer feedback. And so they're taken to a room that has no windows, the door is locked. They give a little buddy his mask and he puts it on. The commercial plays.
It's time. It's time. Time for the big
This is just the same old stuff.
And then something horrible happens to little buddy. And of course, Cochran is making Chalice watch all of this. And I think this is actually kind of brilliant because I have seen complaints and heard complaints on other podcasts and even had this thought myself. But there's a great callback to this scene later on in the movie when they set up the commercial for the Kupfers to watch. Chalice kind of looks over and watches the scientist guy or businessman punching in all the buttons on his computer. And so later on, Chalice actually uses that information to, in essence, escape. And it's so subtle that I've basically missed it every time I've watched it. It's still kind of clunky, and again, it's a plot device, but at least they bothered to do that instead of just saying, oh, well, he, somehow through movie logic knows what buttons to push to make the commercial play later on.
I think it's time for a break.
So this is where we really find out what's happening and what's going to happen to the kids. Within the commercial, a signal is emitted that activates the chip on the back of the masks and makes horrible things happen to these kids. And little buddy falls over, the mask is kind of melting, and then a ton of bugs and snakes and other gross stuff crawl out of his head. Those snakes attack his parents and they're basically all dead. But it's not just the computer chip that is causing this to happen. And this is something that I haven't even talked about yet. And it was always something that I thought was a little clunky and mishandled in the story, but it's really not. Early on, there is a news report on TV about a big chunk of Stonehenge that has gone missing or been stolen. When I would think about the movie, I would think about truncated time and how all of this was supposed to happen within like a week of Halloween, where they got Stonehenge, they were chipping little pieces away, putting it in with the computer chip, attaching that to masks, getting masks all across the country and out to all the kids across the country, had this commercial made, etc., etc. And I finally realized in that news report that Stonehenge, or the part of Stonehenge that was stolen, that had happened 9 months prior. And that kind of opened up the movie for me. And, you know, along with a few of the other things that I always thought were sort of clunky and goofy, they really took the care and the time to broach those in the script. So, thumbs up, Tommy Lee Wallace. And there's one more example of that I'll get to shortly. But at this point, Cochran spells out the master plan, and it's a great little speech. It is the whole point of the story. Why is this happening? Why are they doing this? And it's something that a lot of people don't like, but I think it's just fantastic.
Why, Cochran? Why? Do I need a reason? Mr. Comfort was right, you know. I do love a good joke, and this is the best ever. A joke on the children. But there's a better reason. You don't really know much about Halloween. You thought no further than the strange custom of having your children wear masks and go out begging for candy. It was the start of the year in our old Celtic lands, and we'd be waiting in our houses of wattles and clay. The barriers would be down, you see, between the real and the unreal. And the dead might be looking in to sit by our fires of turf. Halloween. The festival of Samhain. The last great one took place 3,000 years ago, and the hills ran red with the blood of animals and children. Sacrifices is part of our world, our craft. Witchcraft. To us, it was a way of controlling our environment. It's not so different now. It's time again. In the end, we don't decide these things, you know. The planets do. They're in alignment, and it's time again. The world's going to change tonight, Doctor. I'm glad you'll be able to watch it.
So it's basically a big fuck you to the kids, to capitalism, to commercialism. Commercialism? The commercialism of Halloween and other holidays. We are going to make the streets run red with blood. The blood of children and any unfortunate teenagers and adults who happen to be wearing the masks as well. So it's a joke on the children. Yay!
A joke on the children.
And that's where we get the title of the movie, Season of the Witch, with that little comment from Chalice about witchcraft. I think it's kind of a loose connection. They probably could have come up with something a little bit differently. But people always ask, what does this have to do with witches? And there you have it right there. And to follow through with the Bond villain hero thing, they just tie Chalice up, put him in a room, lock the door, and put the TV on so that he will succumb to the commercial as well. You know, instead of just killing him right there. When he does escape, there's some great things, and he does escape. I've obviously just let that out of the bag. His escape is great for one thing. He rolls over from the contraption that he's tied to, and he kicks in the TV, takes a piece of the glass, frees his hands, and then works his hands up to the mask and makes one dead-on shot with the mask onto the CCTV that's watching him. And then from there, he gets out of the room and finds Ellie. And here again, we've had like a whole day pass. And this is another point that will require spoilers. So if you don't want to spoil the movie, stop here real quick, go watch the movie, and then come back. Again, when I thought about the movie, and this is a major plot point, we have another twist ending here. It sort of harkens back to Tourist Trap in a way, but Ellie has been turned into one of the clockwork figures. She is now a robot, an automaton, and like many people, I would wonder, when did this happen? When did they have the time to do this? Or was she always an automaton, which doesn't really make any sense? Or did it happen shortly after they got there? You know, when did this happen? And I think for a lot of people, they thought that because they didn't think there was enough time when she was kidnapped between then and when she was rescued. But there's like almost a full day, at least 12 hours of time between her kidnapping and when Chalice finds her. So, you know, if you're going to suspend your disbelief and think that this guy can create these things, then I guess you can suspend your disbelief enough to think, well, he can do one this quickly. How he does it, is it her skin? You know, all that stuff you could go into fine details about. But I think if you're going by the logic of the movie, there was plenty of time to do it after she was kidnapped. It wouldn't make any sense for this to have been a setup before they ever met, to where she would bring him into this story somehow to uncover all of this before, you know, the commercial played and all the kids were killed. So I don't buy that. It was done at some point while they were there in Santa Mira. But back to the escape, Chalice gets out of the room. He goes through the ducts of the factory, goes out one building back into another, and finds her, and then they need to get out of the factory, but Chalice wants to stop this from happening. And so we have one of the great unintentional comedy scenes in just about any movie ever. This is one of those clunky parts that I'm sure gets a chuckle from anybody who watches the movie. It makes me laugh. They are in the main part of the Stonehenge factory. You know, this is kind of the secret part of the factory where all this pagan magic is happening. They're trying to get through the building, and they hide behind a rack of masks. And to get to the further part of the room, they duck behind the rack and they move it, they roll it along with them behind it. So you get this wide shot of them doing that in the background, and it is straight out of, I mean, it's like Abbott and Costello. And I don't think it was meant to be funny, but it plays as a great comedy moment. And then what Chalice ends up doing is grabbing a box of the unattached Silver Shamrock logos, and he gets up into the rafters. He gets up into the rafters after punching the computer code to initiate the commercial. So all the screens that all of the businessmen are and or scientist men at this point are watching, and it initiates the commercial to start playing. He gets up into the rafters and dumps all of the trademark logos down. And so the point is that the transmission from the computer will start.
That doesn't sound right.
I meant to say commercial, not computer. Hitting off of the logos, and that's exactly what happens. Takes out all of the scientist, businessman, robot dudes, and they get a nice little slow clap from Cochrane at their besting him and his horrible plan. And then in the meantime, this kind of creates this vortex that happens in the circle of computers that shoots a laser off of Stonehenge, and that hits Cochrane, and he turns to stone and disappears. So, you know, maybe not the smoothest of endings, but it worked for this 14-year-old kid. Now, after he's dispatched all the villains, he makes one final call home. And during this time when he's called home, his ex is just berating him constantly. He's basically pushing off his fatherly duties. He doesn't tell her where he's going, when he gets embroiled in all this. And she just thinks he's out screwing chicks and getting drunk. This is partly true, but when he calls this time, he is trying to get her to take the masks away from the kids. And it's actually kind of great because he comes off as totally drunk. He sounds like he's drunk.
At the Santa Mira, when they killed Buddy Cuffer and his whole family, they killed him.
She basically blows him off. So his only recourse now, just to save his 2 kids, is to get these commercials off the air.
It's almost time, kids. The clock is ticking.
But we're not done yet, and we still have some great things in the kind of denouement of the movie here. If that's the finale, then we get the escape of Chalice and Robot Ellie, wherein she attacks him not once, not twice, not 3 times, but 4 times. And this is where he discovers that she has been turned into a robot. She attacks him in the car crashes, he stumbles out. I always love this shot because he's coming around the car and you can see through the windows on the driver's side into the passenger side, and she's not there anymore, but you can see her arm, and it is attached to the passenger side door. And so it's great because this is all one shot, and he comes around and the arm is on there and it's twitching. Then she comes up behind him for the second attack, missing one arm. She attacks him with her good arm. He ends up knocking her head off, a la Alien and Ash. Her body and head fall to the ground. He gets back in the car and is attacked by the bodiless arm. He tosses that out of the car and then gets attacked one final time by the headless, armless body. And that's kind of when 14-year-old me just goes, beautiful. So Chalice finally makes it back to the gas station where this kind of all started. So again, we've sort of got the location, where is this in relation to the town, Santa Mira, so on and so on. But he's got to call somebody to get these commercials taken off the air. Now, who the hell he calls, I have no idea, because I'm pretty sure there is no National Commercial Company, LLC, that controls all the commercials in the country on 3 different networks. But before we get to all that, let's talk about time zones, because this is one of the major clunky plot points that does not make sense. There are 4 time zones in the U.S. plus Hawaii and Alaska, and I don't know if they're on the same time zone or not. But, this has been touted as playing at 9 o'clock on Halloween night. There is no mention of time zones, different times. Is it playing at 9 o'clock in one time zone and 6 o'clock in another? Because if we're talking about 9 o'clock, then, and this takes place in California, then the East Coast, the Midwest, the mountain time zones, all those kids are fucking dead already. So he's only going to be able to save the kids on the West Coast and kids in Alaska and Hawaii. So regardless of those 2 things, who he's calling and the time zones, he eventually gets the commercial pulled from 2 of the networks. And while this is going on at the gas station, a car has pulled up and there's a group of trick-or-treaters, and I don't know where I guess they're going to the Silver Shamrock Factory to trick-or-treat. They're in the middle of nowhere. They show up. He's trying to get the 3rd network to pull the commercial, and this is just one of the great nihilistic endings
Dark masks, gather round your TV set. Put on your masks and watch. All witches, all skeletons, all jack-o'-lanterns.
The third commercial, it's still on, please. Take out the third channel. The third channel, it's still running. Stop it, please. For God's sake, please stop it. There's no more time. You've got to... Please, stop it. Stop it now. Turn it off. Turn it off. Stop it. Stop it. Stop it. Stop it. Stop it. Stop it. Stop it.
So ultimately, Chalice is unsuccessful in getting the commercial pulled completely. Scores and scores of kids are dead, and the movie has ended. Now, why this didn't become a huge success and spawn this anthology series, I don't know, maybe the answer is in that final scene. Of course, Universal hated the end. They wanted it changed. They talked to Carpenter. Carpenter passed it off to Wallace and said, hey, this is your picture. He wanted it left in. And I think the reason he was able to do that is because they made these things cheap. That was basically so that Carpenter could put his name above the titles, so he would get that in final cut of his movies. And even though he wasn't the director on this, he's still the producer, and so apparently still had some say and left that say up to Wallace in this instance. And maybe that was the final nail in the coffin for the idea. Beside the weirdness and the clunkiness of the story, the depressing, harsh ending is probably what really killed the idea of moving forward with an anthology.
I think it's time for a break.
So let's talk about 1982 and John Carpenter. He had two movies just absolutely flop within a matter of months from each other. One that he directed and one that he produced. The Thing came out in June of 1982, and it was, like Halloween 3, an absolute commercial flop and critical flop together, and no one wanted to see it. But both of these movies have gone through major reevaluation over the years, and I think The Thing is probably more exalted than Halloween 3 because it's a fantastic movie, and a lot of people were put off by the gore that they had not seen before. And I'm not talking about like Friday the 13th slasher gore. It has some really serious body horror special effects gore that's just amazing to this day, but people weren't really prepared for it. I have loved that movie since the first time I saw it. I didn't have preconceived notions about what these movies were supposed to be or not supposed to be. And so this kind of, and it must have been a hard year for him, and maybe he didn't care once they were out of his hands. I don't know. He does sort of seem to take a hands-off approach after something is out there, and, it's up to the audiences and the critics, but Halloween Part 3 has had a major reevaluation as well. I think it's partly to do with people like me who saw it back then when they were younger, who liked it then and can champion it now, as opposed to, people just rediscovering it, or people that saw it then that didn't like it that are changing their minds. I mean, there may be some of all of that, but I think it's more that people like me who liked it then started saying, hey, there's nothing wrong with this movie. It's a fun, funky, weird little movie. It's beautifully shot. It's, it may have some plot holes and things like that, but it's fairly well acted. Again, it looks great. Dean Cundy did the cinematography. So it had the heart and the head of the previous movies, but it just didn't have Michael Myers, and that was the kiss of death for it. But I say, screw that. Go watch it. Watch it. If you haven't watched it, watch it. Make it your Halloween movie this year. Enjoy it for what it is, and don't dismiss it for what it isn't.
I think it's time for a break.
So my rankings of the 8 movies in the Halloween franchise are based on my personal feelings, the movies that I enjoy watching the most. And as I mentioned early on, Part 1 and Part 3 are kind of tied for first place, depending maybe on my mood. I think that Part 1, the original Halloween, is the better made movie. Sometimes I just want that weird funkiness of Part 3. I would say Part 1 edges Part 3 out, so they're first and second, and then Part 2 is third, followed by Halloween H2O in fourth place, and then they kind of basically go in order from there. They brought back Michael Myers and in Part 4, and then the protagonist is Jamie Lloyd, who is supposed to be Laurie Strode's niece. And so that was played by Danielle Harris in 4 and 5. And it's kind of an interesting, it starts out with a really good fall-like feel. It feels like a Halloween movie. Of course, they bring Loomis back as well, and he just has some scarring on his face, on the right side of his face, that I think by the time of Part 6 has completely disappeared. So sort of brush off all that about him and Michael Myers dying in Part 2, and it has a really downer ending, which I enjoyed as well. And then 5 and 6 are just kind of a mess, and they introduce the Cult of Thorn at the end, although I don't think they name it in Part 5. That becomes part of the mythology of Michael in Part 6. And I did watch, I've only seen the theatrical cut of Part 6. I know a lot of people prefer the producer's cut. I am willing to take a chance with that one at some point and watch it. And that introduced Paul Rudd to the world, and it's kind of a strange introduction to him because he's very different than he is in most of the movies that he became well known for. And he sort of has this weird affectation through the whole movie where he's talking in this kind of serious voice all the time. And it just really bugged me. Let's see, after that was H2O, and then Resurrection is just a piece of crap. And I won't spend any more time talking about that. Jamie Lee Curtis came back for H2O and then is in the early parts of Resurrection and finally gets killed off. As far as the Rob Zombie remakes, I really have a hard time with him. His movies are just so greasy and grimy, and everyone is so overtly white trash. It's hard to watch. Lords of Salem is a movie that I watched a couple of times that I feel is his most subdued until the end, but I don't want all that backstory for Michael Myers. That first part of his remake of the original is just way, way, way too much stuff about the kid. And it just really basically turns him into a fucked up asshole of a kid who does this horrible stuff instead of an enigma like the original. For his remake of Part 2, I did kind of appreciate that they did the time jump and we weren't in the hospital the whole time like in the original Part 2. So I gave him kudos for that, and I think I actually prefer his Part 2 to the Part 1 just because it's not so much backstory. But neither one is something that I care to revisit. And of course, now we have the new direct sequel to the original with Jamie Lee Curtis back, and that'll be out shortly. And I will definitely see that. I am very curious to see how they erase all of the sequels and bring it back to just Laurie Strode versus The Shape, where they are not brother and sister. There is no Cult of Thorn. It is just the enigma of The Shape and a traumatized female lead. Okay, well, I think that wraps up this kind of special episode of Wake Up Heavy, an unexpected episode. I was planning on doing Dead and Buried, and since it's October, and since it's kind of a movie that I feel has some connections very loose connections, maybe just only connections that I feel to Halloween 3. I'm going to go ahead and plan on getting Dead and Buried in the can before the month is over. So we will have 2 full episodes this month. I won't do any short things. So look for Dead and Buried within the next couple of weeks. Comments and ratings. Oh, and I'm also on Twitter now, finally, at Wake Up Heavy. Also on Instagram at Wake Up Heavy, Facebook. Those should all be linked on SoundCloud and or the blog. Stop and say hi. And don't forget to wake up heavy.
Happy, happy Halloween, 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 happy, happy Halloween, silver shamrock. Happy, happy Halloween, 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 happy, happy Halloween, silver shamrock.
It's almost time, kids. The clock is ticking. Be in front of your TV sets for the Horror-thon. And remember the big giveaway at 9. Don't miss it. And don't forget to wear your masks. The clock is ticking. It's almost time.